There are moments in human history that almost defy belief. Moments so cruel, so heavy with silence, that words alone can't contain them. The Holodomor is one of them. Between 1932 and 1933, deep in the black soil of Ukraine, one of the richest and most fertile regions on Earth, millions of innocent people perished. Entire families, entire villages, erased. Not by drought, not by plague, not by war, but by hunger. A hunger created by human hands. The word Holodomor combines two Ukrainian words, holod, meaning hunger, and moriti, meaning to inflict death. Together, they form a single terrifying truth: death by starvation. This was no accident, no tragedy of nature. It was an act of policy, an act of control, born from one man's obsession with power, Joseph Stalin's dream to mold the Soviet Union into an empire of absolute obedience. And while millions were dying, the world remained silent. Ships of grain left Ukrainian ports, carrying food to other nations, while the people who grew it starved to death. This is the story of one of humanity's darkest crimes, a genocide buried beneath decades of lies. 2. Background: the dream that turned to fear. To understand the Holodomor, we must go back to the 1920s, a time when the Soviet Union was still young, fragile, and desperate to prove its power. After Lenin's death, Joseph Stalin rose to the top. He promised progress, unity, and equality, but his vision demanded absolute control. In Stalin's world, there could be no independence, no dissent, no freedom of thought. And nowhere was that independence stronger than in Ukraine, a proud nation with its own language, culture, and vast farmlands that fed millions. Ukrainian peasants, self-reliant and hard-working, were everything Stalin feared. They didn't depend on Moscow, they loved their land, and they resisted control. To Stalin, that was unacceptable. A nation that could feed itself could also think for itself, and that was something he could not allow. So he crafted a plan. In 1929, Stalin launched one of the most radical economic experiments in history: collectivization. The idea sounded simple on paper: merge all private farms into large, state-controlled collectives. Farmers would no longer own their land, their livestock, or even their tools. Everything would belong to the state. But in reality, collectivization was a war fought not with armies, but with hunger and fear. Those who resisted were branded enemies of the people. Kulaks, the term, which originally meant wealthy peasant, quickly turned into a death sentence. Families labeled as kulaks were arrested, executed, or deported to labor camps in Siberia. Armed soldiers and political officers went village by village, seizing grain, livestock, furniture, even clothing. They measured every sack, every barn, every field, and left behind nothing. Peasants tried to hide food, burying it in the ground or concealing it in walls. But secret police raided houses day and night, using metal rods to pierce the earth and uncover hidden grain. Neighbors were forced to inform on one another. A whisper of disloyalty could destroy a family. By 1931, the countryside was in chaos. Agricultural production collapsed, yet the state kept demanding more. Quotas rose higher, even as harvests fell lower. When the people couldn't meet the impossible demands, Stalin called them saboteurs. And the punishment for sabotage was starvation. By the winter of 1932, hunger had turned into death. The Soviet government sealed the borders of Ukraine. No one could leave, no one could trade, no one could seek help. Soldiers blocked roads and guarded train stations. Villages became open-air prisons. The state continued to take whatever food remained. Even seeds meant for the next year's planting were confiscated. It became illegal to glean grain from the fields. A starving mother picking up fallen kernels could be executed for theft of socialist property. The famine spread like fire. Entire families starved together. Children cried until their voices disappeared. People fell in the streets, too weak to move. Those who survived watched as the faces around them vanished, one by one. The death toll rose by tens of thousands each day. Some regions lost a third of their population. And still, trains loaded with Ukrainian grain rolled toward Moscow and the Black Sea ports, heading for export. Proof, Stalin said, that socialism was succeeding. Foreign journalists, controlled by Soviet censors, reported that everything was fine. Some even repeated the official lies, claiming stories of famine were anti-Soviet propaganda. Meanwhile, local officials were terrified to report the truth. Anyone who mentioned hunger risked execution for spreading panic. So silence ruled. Silence deeper than the hunger itself. By the summer of 1933, the famine began to ease, not because food returned, but because there were fewer mouths left to feed. Entire villages had vanished. Fields lay empty, dotted with unburied bones. The few who survived did so with memories so painful that many never spoke of them again. Estimates vary, but historians believe between 4 and 7 million Ukrainians died during the Holodomor. Some put the number even higher. It was one of the worst human-made catastrophes in recorded history. Yet the Soviet Union denied it ever happened. Stalin's government destroyed documents, rewrote statistics, and silenced witnesses. Official reports described the year as one of bad harvests, not genocide. For decades, even mentioning the famine was dangerous. Generations grew up in silence, forbidden to mourn their dead or to speak their names. The world, too, looked away. Some Western journalists and diplomats, aware of the truth, chose not to confront the Soviet regime, fearing political consequences or refusing to believe such cruelty could be deliberate. Only years later, after Stalin's death, did fragments of the truth begin to surface. Today, the Holodomor stands as one of the clearest examples of how absolute power can turn ideology into murder. It reminds us that when truth is controlled, when propaganda replaces reality, millions can die in silence. In Ukraine, the Holodomor is not just a chapter of history, it is part of national identity. Every November, candles light up windows across the country in remembrance. People pause for a moment of silence, honoring those whose lives were taken not by nature, but by tyranny. The fields that once witnessed death now bloom again, but beneath the soil, memories remain. The fields that once witnessed death now bloom again, but beneath the soil, memories remain. Every harvest, every loaf of bread, every child's laughter is an act of defiance, a promise that those who perished will never be forgotten. The Holodomor also challenges the world to remember that truth matters, because once truth dies, humanity follows. And when governments decide who deserves to live and who deserves to starve, civilization itself begins to crumble. The Holodomor is more than a story of famine. It's a mirror held up to humanity, showing what happens when fear becomes policy, when lies become law, and when silence becomes survival. It asks a question that still echoes today. How far can power go before it destroys its own people? The answer lies in the empty villages of 1933, in the eyes of the survivors who saw their world disappear, and in the warning their memory leaves for us. History is not just about the past, it is a map for the future, and if we ignore the lessons of the Holodomor, we risk repeating its horrors in new forms, in new lands, under new names. So remember this: The Holodomor was not caused by the earth or the sky. It was caused by men who thought they could play God, and the only way to stop such darkness from returning is to keep the truth alive. Never forget their hunger, never forget their silence, and never let power erase the truth again.